30 seconds.
Okay.
Just a note, I've got a previous meeting at 2:30, so I'll be leaving then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I thought I was going crazy, Director Sparrow. Okay. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough, sir. Okay. We'll kick off now. So it is currently 1:30. So we'll start off by recognizing that we're conducting our business today on the territories of the Hoop-Atchison and Tashant First Nations in this room, in this building. Although I will acknowledge that we're probably coming to you live from the territories of many First Nations, Indigenous communities. For example, some of us might be in the Kwangin territory or Coast Salish, and so on and so forth. However, we do acknowledge that the ACRD sits in the traditional territories of the Nuu-chah-nulth peoples. With that in mind, we are in a hybrid format, and as a result, we do have people online and in the boardroom today. So what we'll do because of that fact is go through around the table this way, and including staff, and identify ourselves. There's no one in the gallery at the moment. And then we'll go online and introduce all the directors. I do believe that will be it from there. We do have some folks who are waiting to speak as a part of a petitioner delegation. You won't need to introduce yourself now. In any instance, anybody who may be viewing this meeting live, either through YouTube or on Zoom itself, we don't normally monitor the chat functions. So if you have any questions or comments that you'd like the board to receive and potentially comment on, that'll go at question period on item 13 of the agenda. Please use the email address responses@acrd.bc.ca, and that would be great. But with that, I think we'll go into introductions and then straight into the approval of the agenda. So we'll go counterclockwise and start with Heather. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Heather Zenner, Manager of Administrative Services.
Hi, everyone. My name is Debbie Haggard. I'm the City Council appointed representative to the ACRD board and Vice Chair of the board.
I'm Randy LaCourciere, the alternate director for Sprout Lake.
Mike Sparrow, electoral, all right, sorry, Jerry, electoral area.
Jada Siga, Director for Area C Long Beach.
Daniel Sayah, the CAO for the ACRD.
And I am John Jack, the Director for Huu-ay-aht First Nations and the Chair. And we'll go to the staff table.
Good afternoon, Alex Dyer, Planning Manager at the ACRD.
Good afternoon, Terry Fong, Chief Financial Officer. Good afternoon, Cynthia Dick, General Manager of Administrative Services.
Great, thank you. So we'll start online with Susan. Please go ahead.
I'm Susan Roth, and I represent the best interests of the people in Beaver Creek.
Thank you. And Mariah.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Uthkwama Mariah Coots. I am the Director for Uchuckalsa Tribe Government. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob.
Bob Beckett, coming from the salmon capital of British Columbia, Area A, Banfield.
Oh, nice. Dan, please go ahead.
Mayor Dan Loft, Tofino, Iiats, Tlokwiat, Hahuthi.
Great. And Marilyn.
Good afternoon, Marilyn McEwen, Mayor of Ucluelet, coming to you from the Ucluelet Territory.
Thank you. Fred?
Thank you, Chair. I would say that Port Alberni still has a little big sign out front that says Salmon Capital of the World, but thank you, Bob. Beaufort Area Director. Thank you.
Kristen.
Afternoon, Kirsten Johnson, representing Toquat Nation.
Great, thank you. Speaking of signs, very nice sign there in the news there, Shari. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Shari Minions, Mayor for the City of Port Alberni. And just noting that I'm having some trouble with logging on my laptop, so I might log back out and log in and try again. Thanks.
Fair enough, thank you. We have plenty of staff online as well. We probably don't need to identify them, but thank you for not necessarily crowding into the limited bullpen we have with the staff tables here. So with that in mind, we'll move into the approval of the agenda. Before you, you have an agenda where I think the only change is moving from one piece of minutes being received. It will now be adopted, which I think is just different in some way, shape, or form. I don't believe there are any more new materials or changes to the agenda that we have. So with that in mind, could we have the motion to move the agenda as presented? Thank you, Director Roth, seconded by Director Coots. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? All opposed? Okay, motion carried. Okay, so we, next thing is we go into declarations. Does anyone have any conflicts of interest, apparent conflicts of interest, or gifts exceeding $250? Dr. Haggard?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to declare a conflict of interest with 9F under Planning Matters McClellan due to the proximity of my neighboring property.
All right, thank you. Any further declarations? I was gifted a pair of shoes from Director and potentially Chair Plant from the AVICC. I complimented his shoes and he sent me a pair, but since they're from TMU, I don't think they're $250. That being said, they're the latest shoes I've ever ever wore. I can't show you without conduct unbecoming, so maybe I'll just send a photo at some point. Okay, that brings us into the next item, which is the adoption of minutes. 4A, we have the Board of Directors meeting minutes for April 10th, 2024. Would anyone like to move it? Thank you, Director Roth. Seconded by, thank you, Director Siga. Does anyone have any corrections, errors, omissions, etc.? Seeing none. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. Next up is the Accessibility Committee dated April 9th, 2024. Thank you, Director Roth, for moving. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Director Sparrow. Any further comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? All opposed? Your motion carries. Next up, next page, item C, Solid Waste Management Plan Committee, dated April 11th, 2024. Thank you, Director Roth, for moving. Seconded by Director Sparrow. Thank you. Any further comment? Seeing none. All those in favor? Motion carried. Item D, Agricultural Development Committee meeting dated April 16th, 2024. Thank you, Director Coots, seconded by Dr. Roth. Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. Item E, Bamfield Area Services Committee meeting dated April 16th, 2024. Thank you, Director Sparrow, seconded by Dr. Siga. Any further comment? Saying none, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried. Item F, Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee meeting dated April 17th, 2024. We're really catching up on the minutes. Thank you, Director Beckett, seconded by Director Coots. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried. Item G, Electoral Area Directors Committee meeting dated April 17th, 2024. This is right after, I think. Thank you, Director Siga, seconded by Director Sparrow. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried. Item H, Alberni Valley Regional Airport Advisory Committee meeting dated April 18th, 2024. Thank you, Director Siga, seconded by Director Coots. Any further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carried. And finally, item I, Alberni Valley Aquatic Center Advisory Committee meeting dated April 18th, 2024. Moved by Director Haggard, seconded by Director Sparrow. Any further comments? Director Roth, go ahead.
I'm curious, what's the difference between them being received or adopted?
I believe it has to do with the timing involved of the minutes being received. Go ahead, Heather.
Yes, normally meeting minutes are adopted by the particular committee where the minutes come from. However, the Aquatics Committee is a select committee and it's intended to end. So we want the minutes to be adopted by the board, so they're final.
Okay. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? A motion carried. Okay, so that brings us to the end of minutes. It's quite a few. 9 comes to 5A. So first up, we have Mr. Seth Wright, Senior Manager for Government Relations, BC Transit, with an update on service expansions for this fiscal year. Seth, are you here? There you are.
I am.
Welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you kindly. It's my privilege and honor today to be able to share with you some information about the West Coast Transit Service, which I understand BC Transit and the ACRD, as well as your member communities and a number of activists in your community have been working to support for over a decade now. We have been successful in acquiring provincial government support for funding the service for connecting the communities on the West Coast. For the calendar year 2025. So I understand you've developed an interim service, and we're excited about that interim service. We're working closely with your staff to be able to facilitate as smooth a transition as possible. We have a project manager on our end coming on board in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be having a kickoff meeting on our end to start to plan that transition. And so we're working closely on that. We're excited and pleased to be able to relay this news, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Just for those who may be watching at home, when you say 2025 starting calendar year?
That's right. So we're looking at exact implementation timing and what makes sense for us and yourselves, and that conversation is ongoing, but we're looking at probably around January to March.
Great, thank you. Director Law, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Wright. I'd love to hear a little more about the expansion of the service, possible expansion of the timing, et cetera, et cetera. Anything you got, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, glad you're on board.
For sure, and through the chair, I guess in terms of the service design, it will reflect the service design that was laid out in the 2020 service plan, and that the regional district has set up through direct contract. The service design right now, I understand, is a bit contracted compared to the full breadth of what was envisioned in that 2020 service plan. In particular, what was cut was evening service. So we're excited that we have the full package of 7,500 hours to be able to roll out. So we'll be enhancing evening service and providing more flexibility in that regard. I think in terms of more detail than that, I can't speak too much because our planners and schedulers haven't started the detailed work of developing the schedule, but we'll be using the same bus stops and all that infrastructure that you've already set up, and we've been involved in conversations throughout the entire process to enable a smooth transition, and we're excited to be able to transition in such short order now.
Thank you for that. Director Boyko? Dr. Boyko, are you? Oh, there we go. Please go ahead.
Super. I thought I saw Marilyn's hand up before mine. My question is not really about the West Coast Transit Service. It's just a note that we heard from the people regarding the transit survey currently that's closing, I believe, today for Sprout Lake and Beaver Creek, is that there's lots of questions about accessibility and gender, but there's no option to say, I do not want transit service. So just a bit of feedback from the people that if we do a survey like this again, they would like to see an option, whether they use it or not, of saying, yes, I want this, or no, I don't want this, because that doesn't exist. Thank you.
Seth, you're muted, sorry.
Yeah, through the chair, of course. Thank you so much for the feedback. We appreciate it, and I'll make sure that's incorporated in future surveys and engagement.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Any further comments? Dr. McEwen, did you have a comment? Or I saw that you put your hand down, that's why I didn't ask, but.
Yes, I was just going to ask about the evening service, but that was covered off under Director Law's question.
Okay, great. So I have Dr. Haggard and then Dr. Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Seth, I just wanted to let you know there's already been some amazing stories coming from the West Coast about how important this transit is for those communities. So thank you very much for stepping up. We really appreciate it. It just changes lives on the West Coast.
I have Dr. Roth and then Daniel.
I just wanted to note that some of the people at our town hall meeting noted that the survey was online only. Is there other avenues or other ways that people could send in a response?
And through the chair, I assume you're referring to the Port Alberni survey for the Transit Future Service Plan that we have been engaged on. So that survey was available both online and paper copies were available at 4 locations. So City Hall, the Echo Center, the First Nations Friendship Center, and now I'm just struggling to remember what the 4th location was. I don't think it was ACRD Hall, but
yeah.
That would not be anywhere in Beaver Creek, any of them. It's not a problem. I just thought I would say what some of the responses were. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Daniel and then Director Siga and then Director Boyko.
I just wanted to add on what Director Haggard had to say. And in the first 12 days of operations, we had approximately 300 passenger rides. So it's just good to see healthy numbers straight out of the gates, and hopefully that continues to grow.
Thank you, Director Siga and Director Boyko.
I just want to add to those words. Thank you so much for acknowledging the real need for transportation on the West Coast. And it will certainly go a long ways in terms of improving accessibility and safety. Thank you.
Great. Dr. Boyko, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My note is I went through all the documentation on the survey online and through all the Facebook and stuff I could find. I never saw any mention of any paper copies anywhere. So I know the survey ends today, but if we do this again in the future, we have to make it a lot more obvious on where paper copies could be picked up. And if it's passed on to the board members, they can pass it on to people as well, just to get as much community engagement as possible, because that's the first of I heard of it today, and I'm usually pretty up on everything. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments? So on behalf of the board, Seth, I'm really happy to hear that BC Transit's coming in for this next year. Taking the first step is something that I just want to acknowledge that the communities on the West Coast really took forward and brought forward with some good resolve, to a point where it was discussed quite a long time ago. So a lot of pressure, a lot of time was put forward to make sure that this happened in a good way. And I'd like to say that it did happen in a good way. So with the support of the province stepping forward, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of conversations to have about how this can be a good opportunity to figure out how we don't necessarily have to do it on our own in order to get attention, but I think that's more of a provincial type level. So if we can have a conversation in the future, what could happen in terms of having a greater effect with the decision making that moves up through BC Transit into the province itself. I know that, Seth, you're not necessarily making all of the decisions when it comes to this, but you might have some insight into the types of approaches that an interested community might have in helping to make this happen. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Certainly. Thank you. Happy to support that ongoing work.
Hey,
Thanks for your time.
Exiting words at this point? All right, so thank you for your presentation, Seth, and I think we'll move into the next presentation. Okay. All right, so next up we have Ms. Lenore Lee, the lead audit engagement partner, and Cameron Rice-Gurl, senior manager for KPMG. This is the audit findings report for the year ending 2023. Welcome back, Lenora, and hello, Cameron. If we've met before, hello again. Please go ahead.
Great. Thanks for having us at your meeting this afternoon. We'd just like to take a few minutes to share with you the findings from our audit of the financial statements of ACRD. In terms of overall status, we are substantially complete the audit. We've been working with management in March primarily to review the figures within the draft financial statements that are included in starting on page 92 in your agenda package today. I'll just share my screen here so that we can show a couple highlights from our audit findings report. In terms of other outstanding matters, there are no items that are outstanding at this time other than discussion of the findings with the board and overall acceptance of the financial statements. At that time, we'll also receive the signed representation letter from management that just indicates we've received all the information we need to in order to complete our audit work. So nothing unexpected here, that we've received full cooperation from management and ready, easily accessible and timely responses to all of our questions. In our audit planning letter that was provided to the board earlier this year, we had established a materiality of 500,000 for the audit. We have no unrecorded audit adjustments that we've noted. And as a result, our audit report that's included in your package today is a clean and unqualified audit opinion. That indicates that there's no material errors within them with reference to that 500,000 and that they present fairly in accordance with the accounting standards that ACRD is required to follow. We also have noted in our report that there's no control observations in terms of significant or material weaknesses that have been identified. We don't rely on internal controls to conduct our audit work, but in the regular course of planning our audit, performing risk assessments, we do look to various internal controls and have identified that those that we expect to be in place have been identified and are in place at ACRD. With all of our audits, we are required to perform work over management override of controls. And what that means is that on a day-to-day basis, there are internal controls around things like purchasing, around procurement, that have a very rigorous policy and procedure around them. Management is in a position to potentially record entries that are outside the regular course of operations. And as a result, we focus on those types of areas as part of our audit process. We perform the procedures noted in the middle of the page here, testing journal entries or other adjustments, such as those in and around year-end or specifically recorded in the preparation of the year-end financial statements. We review estimates, particularly those involving significant judgment or potential for bias. And we also review any significant unusual transactions that may have occurred during the year. We use IT-enabled routines to perform this work, so we're able to take the entire journal entries, the register of entries recorded during the year, and use automated techniques to identify unusual pairings of transactions or other unusual account activity. We have no issues to bring to the board's attention in regards to the procedures performed in this area. One of the new accounting standards required to be adopted this year was in regards to asset retirement obligations. We've spoken with you about this one the last couple years. It now requires an earlier liability be recognized for items such as the two landfills, as well as remediation costs for demolition of buildings containing asbestos, where there is a standard externally imposed around how those materials should be disposed of. In the current year, there was a liability of 20 million recognized for asset retirement obligations, and most of that, 18.5, was related to the landfill. There was previously a liability attached to the landfill, and this new standard resulted in an increase to that liability of 8.6 million. That was primarily because the new standard requires the entirety of the cost be recognized upfront, whereas under the previous standard, it was more so on a usage basis. So as the landfill was filled, the liability would be recognized proportionately in accordance with the capacity. In terms of the audit work performed, we did verify management's work in both these areas, both landfill and other asbestos-containing materials. It is a fairly significant estimate, so there are a number of unknowns where management has made their best estimate. We have verified those inputs, for example, inflation rate over time, discount rate, or the cost of money over time. And we're satisfied that those inputs are appropriate given all of the available information today. We did recommend one adjustment in this area. It resulted in a reduction of revenue of 1.7 million, and instead that was applied towards the the asset retirement obligation asset. What that value represents is just the change in assumptions in the fiscal 2023 year that is applied to the asset rather than as a revenue transaction. This was a significant amount of work for management to undertake in the current year and had actually started prior to 2023. But they have been able to gather a lot of information around the asset base of the district that will also now feed into the asset management plans and be able to be quite useful information as the district progresses in its work around asset management. The audit report you'll also see has an emphasis of matter, which is basically just a notation that numbers in the 2022 year have been modified to reflect this adoption of the new accounting standard. We have also reviewed the change to the 2022 figures and had no issues or concerns, and those values have been recorded accurately in the financial statements. I'll turn it over to Cameron, who's going to talk about a couple other areas of focus in the audit.
Thank you, Lenora, and thank you everyone for your time. So if we move on to, the next page, I will touch on government transfers. So government transfer revenue recognized during the year was 8.1 million, up from 5.5 million in the prior year. In terms of audit work performed, we selected a sample of transfers received and transfers recognized as revenue, and we obtained supporting agreements and a summary of eligible expenses where applicable to confirm the appropriateness of the accounting treatment as either revenue or deferred revenue. We also tested the receipt of the Growing Communities funding received. We reviewed the grant information, and we agree with management's conclusion of the recognition as revenue on receipt. We have no matters to report in terms of government transfers. Moving on to the next page, tangible capital assets. The net book value of the tangible capital asset balance at year end was 52.4 million. As Lenora touched on, a portion of this increase is due to the adoption of asset retirement obligations, as an asset is set up for both the hazardous materials, the buildings arrow, and the landfill arrow. Looking at standard tangible capital assets, additions during the year were 6.6 million. This spend was attributed to the Long Beach Airport fencing project, West Coast multi-use pathway, interior building renovations, and water infrastructure upgrades. In terms of audit work performed, we tested a sample of additions, agreeing to supporting invoice and payment. We sampled assets put into service during the year to verify the amortization method and useful life was in line with company policy. We also performed analytical procedures over amortization, comparing our expectation with actual, and we have no matters to report. Moving on to the next slide, this highlights some other procedures we performed over cash, investments, debt, other revenue, and expenses. With respect to cash, investments, and debt, we confirmed with respective financial institutions the ending balance. We recalculated investment income, and we tested bank reconciling items, and we have no matters to report. With respect to other revenue and expenses, for taxation revenue, we agreed amount of the requisition to approved bylaws and cash receipts. We performed analytical procedures over other revenue line items, comparing actual to our expectation. We performed sampling over operating goods and services, agreeing to invoice support. And we performed analytical procedures over other expense line items, including salaries and wages, by comparing actual to our expectation, and we have no matters to report. Moving on to the next slide. This slide summarizes the corrected misstatements. As Lenora touched on, there's just one misstatement related to the revaluation of the arrow estimate in the current year. So any revaluation would go against the asset until the value of that asset is reduced to nil, and this reduces the fluctuation in the statement of operations year over year. Moving on to the next slide. So we are required to report to you any significant deficiencies in internal controls. As Lenora touched on, our audit doesn't rely on internal controls to conduct our work, but we may look at certain controls in place when performing risk assessment and other procedures. As Lenora mentioned, there were no significant control deficiencies identified that we are required to report to you. Moving on to the next slide, this slide highlights significant accounting policies, estimates, and where there might be departures from GAAP and the applicable financial reporting framework. We have no issues to report. So I will pass it back over to Lenora, who will talk through the appendices. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Cameron. I won't go through these in detail, but we'll let you, review these at your leisure, and please share any comments or questions you have with us. In it is a copy of the representation letter, which we'll obtain from management on conclusion of the audit. There are some new accounting standards that will be effective for 2024 and going forward, and we will continue to work with management on the adoption of those at the time period required. And there's also some information around environmental, social, and governance. There have been some new standards approved at the international level that are required for public companies. There are no requirements for governments to adopt any of these standards at this time. However, just some information for you in terms of what that landscape looks like, and that there's a number of interested parties in that at this time. In terms of the hospital district, those statements will come to you at a later meeting. We won't be in attendance, so we'll just highlight that there's no unexpected or unusual items in that audit findings report or in those financial statements. Likewise, the auditor's opinion on the financial statements is a clean and unqualified audit report. So there was no uncorrected audit adjustments in that area, and a very clean audit as well. Lastly, we'd just like to conclude by expressing our appreciation to management, the finance team, for all of their assistance with being able to conduct a very smooth and clean audit this year. As usual, we really appreciate all of your help and the positive outcome here. Happy to address any questions.
Great, thank you. Before I turn it to the table, Terry, did you have anything you wanted to supplement with?
Sure. Just thank you very much to the KPMG team. It's always a pleasure to work with you guys, and I think we have it going pretty smooth in terms of transferring information back and forth now, which is great. We will upload the presentation. Sorry, it got missed on the agenda, so we'll upload the presentation onto the website for the directors to see after this meeting, as it was a little small on our screen. But again, just thanks to Lenora and Cameron and the team, and happy to assist with any questions.
Great, thank you. Dr. Boyko, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good job, finance team. I have two questions. When are we going to see the SOFI for last year? And secondly, how are we dealing with sole source contracts? For example, if we tender something like, say, the Banfield water system, where we only got one bid, how does that work on an audit financial accountability way? Thank you.
Terry, did you want to take the SOFI report question?
Sure, I could take SOFI. So the SOFI report is due by June 30th. We're just starting to work on that now. So it'll come to the board either the first or second board meeting in June, depending on how fast we get it done. And Lenora, I'll let you tackle the second one, please.
The sole source contracting. So the scope of our work is really on providing an opinion on the accuracy of the financial statements. And so far as the payments are made to a contractor, and there's an invoice to support those amounts, that's really what we're opining on, that the financial statements accurately reflect the payments that have been made. So it's less involved in the sole sourcing.
Any further, Terry?
Yeah, I was just going to give Lenora a little bit more context. So I think what Director Boyko is talking about is that we are getting quite a few situations where we're completing a public process and really only getting one bid back. And so, yeah, it's not really, I definitely, yeah, I agree. It's outside of the audit, and we are going to look at the procurement policy this year for a discussion with the board. I don't know if that will change any results of our procurement results, but it will be worth a discussion at the board table as to how we conduct these things.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks. Director Roth, did you have a question? No? Okay. Any further comments or questions? Okay, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you for the work that you've done in the auditing of the statements, and thank you to the finance department and everyone involved. It's always a monumental task. I remember going through a few of these traumatic experiences, especially with the changes to PSAP in the Huu-ay-aht world, where my First Nation owns interests in publicly traded companies, and that's real fun to untangle, guys. But yeah, maybe another conversation for later. But thank you all for the work that's being done, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us into item C. Now I'm trying to see if Janessa is actually connected. She is. Oh, there we go. So I'd like to welcome Ms. Janessa Dornstouter, the Conservation Partnerships Coordinator for the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust. So thank you and welcome. Please go ahead.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Janessa Dornstouter. I'm a program coordinator at the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust. The CBT is a local community foundation on the West Coast, and we're also the organization that oversees the UNESCO Biosphere designation here for Clayoquot Sound. So we operate within ACRD Area C, serving communities and ecosystems that lie within the territories of the Heshkuyt, Ahousaht, Clayoquot, Ucluelet, and Toquat nations. And although the work we do focuses on Area C, certainly the challenges we're tackling are not unique to this region. They're similar across the regional district, and we often collaborate with folks from the Bamfield and Port Alberni areas. My work convenes people and nations and organizations that are working in the environmental and sustainable development fields and supports collaboration amongst them. So like as a community, oh, I'm just getting some feedback there. All right, I'll move on. So yeah, collective impact is one of our greatest tools we have as a community for tackling these big environmental challenges. And the West Coast of Vancouver Island is unique in that there's just a huge amount of passionate people and organizations and nations and other governments doing really important work to plan infrastructure responsibly, to restore and steward and conserve these lands and waters. And while this is such a great thing, it does create a challenge of staying informed and up to date about the sheer amount of work that's been carried out. And as planners and decision makers, you know how important it is to stay relevant and up to date as you inform yourselves. So CBT has been working to convene and coordinate in a way that supports collaboration amongst all these parties. So we host a regional gathering twice per year to bring together and support groups involved in environmental research, sustainable development, restoration, and stewardship. And this forum was hosted as a pilot last fall and brought together over 75 people representing First Nations, environmental organizations, businesses, local government, provincial government, federal governments. And it was just an incredibly productive day. And we're excited to be continuing to host this gathering twice per year, with the next one coming up on May 7th. The gathering is a full day and centers around roundtable updates for groups to share about their current work and their current priorities. And it's a great time for folks to identify opportunities for collaboration and ensure that their efforts are well planned and well resourced and not being duplicated. Last fall, we had a representative from the municipality of Ucluelet share with me afterwards that they found the forum super helpful to identify who to connect with to break through some of the challenges they're facing on some of their projects. So I invite all of you to attend the next regional forum scheduled for May 7th, and certainly encourage you to send relevant staff to participate. So we'll be hosted in Clayoquot territory here in Tinwis, and there's an option to tune in online as well. So I'll follow up with admin to get an invitation out to those of you who haven't received it already. And I also invite board and staff beyond just Area C to join and learn about some of our shared challenges and see how those are being tackled here on the West Coast. So thanks so much. And yeah, please connect if you have any questions.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Okay, Veda.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all the work that the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust does and how it supports the environment and man living with the environment in a sustainable way. And congratulations on your funding for your new center. I look forward to that being built.
Thanks so much.
Okay, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you for your presentation, and we can just have a reiteration of the time and date of the online thing, just for our benefit. I missed it the first time.
Yeah, I'll say it again, May 7th. The meeting is a full day meeting from 9:30 till around 3:30 with, if you come in person, there'll be a lovely lunch provided here at Tinwis, and you can join in online for the first half. So I'll send those details along to the board so that there's a more defined agenda with timelines for you guys. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. Okay, so that brings us to the end of presentations, and that brings us to item 6, and now we're into correspondence for action. So 6A is a request for an invitation to present on land use planning for agriculture. So would anyone like to speak to this? Go ahead.
I'd like to make the motion if I could, Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead.
I'd like to move that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors issue an invitation to representatives of the Land Use and Geospatial Unit of the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food to make a presentation on agricultural land use planning and the legislative tools available for consideration by local government at an upcoming Board of Directors meeting.
Thank you. Seconder. Thank you, Director Roth. Any comments? Go ahead, Dr. Sparrow.
I have one comment. We have a agricultural development committee meeting. Would it be beneficial if they were here to listen to what was going on and what the development, so they are sort of the experts in the field of agricultural land use? Would that be beneficial?
I think that might be good. Maybe getting them connected in via Zoom or in person would be great. I think it would be helpful. We may want to maybe look at doing a committee of the whole beforehand so that we can have more people in attendance and just have a more free-ranging conversation after the presentation without having to worry about a 10-minute limit or that sort of thing too. I think the merits investigation. But on the motion itself, I think we're all good. Okay, I'll declare all those in favor. All opposed? Okay, motion carried. So I'll send an email out for folks' thoughts on maybe having a committee of the whole on this at some point when it makes sense. Okay, that brings us to the next item, which is item B, a Westcoast Food Society regarding letter of support for the United Way Critical Food Infrastructural Grant. Does anyone like to introduce this? No, or just move the motion? Daniel, go ahead.
I don't think we have a lot to add to this. There was quite a bit of discussion around grants, not that this is directly connected to our grants, but the Westcoast Food Society is moving forward with an application to United Way BC and is seeking some support, a letter of support from the ACRD.
Thank you. Anyone like to move the motion as presented? I don't think it's zero sum for us on this. I think it's just supplemental. Dr. Haggard?
I'll move the motion as presented.
Thank you. So the motion states that the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors forward a letter to Westcoast Food Society for their application to the Critical Food Infrastructural Grant offered by the United Way, BC, to support their goal of assisting remote communities on Vancouver Island to sustainably nourish themselves by providing accessibility to locally produced food and local food production opportunities. Seconded by Director Siga. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor? All opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to correspondence for information. We have several things here. Would anyone like to pull anything out? Director Roth and then Director Boyko, please go ahead. You are muted though, Director Roth.
Just give me a minute here. I just wanted to pull out the one for the Minister of Housing. And I just wanted to make some comments. And this was from people talking about that letter. It was posted online. One person said this push for housing density should be left in the city. Of course, if you own property, you can now subdivide and build multiple homes on small acreages. Developers and realtors can't wait to densify your area, say goodbye to privacy and hello to city living in the country. You can't blame you can blame the government, but don't forget to blame those greedy developers in the neighborhood. Bus stations are good for them. They'll just move to a bigger property to keep their privacy as they pretend that this bothers them. Another person said there's provisions to tax you on the high density zoning, even though you're just a single dwelling. Things get really expensive if you're within a certain area of transit. And then the final person said, there are a couple of parts. The NDP brought in the open zoning of single family residential, but didn't think it through. This allows local government to require additional fees and charges to cover the cost of infrastructure upgrades, killing any new development. They are also giving local government the ability to restrict builders and developers to end tenancies to build new homes, killing any new developments. This type of housing initiative only works in a socialist society. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Boyko, please go ahead.
Chair. Yeah, I just want to talk about the housing stuff too. I've read it thoroughly. I've gone through Bill 44 a few times, and the density around transit areas and transit-oriented areas is a big factor for rural areas, that there will be minimum housing development targets. And I want to ask if the planning department knows anything more about this density bonus above the minimum density in transit-oriented areas is how it is worded. What exactly does that mean? Density bonus, that someone can put houses on top of houses? And I know in some of the transit-oriented areas, they're talking about minimum 6-story structures if you're within 400 meters of a transit stop moving forward. That's all well and good if you're in a city where you have full water and sewer systems, but that doesn't exist anywhere in Sproat Lake, Beaver Creek, Cherry Creek, anything like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alex, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Director Boyko. The transit-oriented development guidelines or regulations that the province has in place apply to areas that have high frequency service 7 days a week. So there are no areas in the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District that, or in the city of Port Alberni, that would apply to. I believe the closest one is Nanaimo, and then it's mostly focused in the larger municipalities. But given that, density bonusing is something that we do speak to in our area OCPs, and that essentially the way we look at it is if a developer were to conserve a certain amount of land as green space or park space, you can shift the density within the parcel. Now, we don't have it a density bonusing bylaw, and we would have to investigate what the new Bill 14 that we're looking at this year, Bill 16, sorry, how that would impact our OCP updates. And I imagine that we will be looking at that as we look at the comprehensive updates that are upcoming on the OCPs.
Yep, supplemental, go ahead.
Just as a follow-up, I think it's past the Nanaimo, it's going up to Lanceville now. However, it's just words that says if you don't have 7 days a week. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware of the fact that density around transit-oriented areas can change very quickly based on 6 days a week, 5 days a week, 7 days a week in areas like that. And the push for increased densification is going to all rural areas at this time, and many people are not happy with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my understanding of TOAs is that it's kind of a designation where it's very high, that we're not even certain that it'll be affecting many areas in Nanaimo, let alone anywhere south of them or north of the Malahat. So I think With that in
We
mind,
can,
to be forced to do
just
anything.
as,
Go ahead.
sorry to cut you off, Chair. I'm just reading the list right now. Woodgrove Exchange is on the list. There's a whole bunch in Nanaimo here. So it is not just Vancouver and Victoria that this is applying to and the Lower Mainland. This is on the island. It will keep growing as we're talking. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I guess Woodgrove does make sense given how much of a hub it is. Okay. Dr. Sparrow, go ahead.
Thank you for that. The one question I have about this intensification is the fact that we have a 1 acre lot. We're allowed to have a secondary dwelling unit if one's under 90 square meters. Does this preclude that? And if we put a dense more buildings, I'm trying to get out here.
Sure. Thank you, Director Sparrow. The as part of Bill 44 that was introduced last year, the ACRD must update our zoning by the end of June to allow for secondary suites in all residentially focused areas with no minimum lot size. So that's how it'll affect us directly at this time. The 3-unit and the 4-unit requirements and the TOA requirements are all focused within municipalities that have full services. So we are limited to the secondary suites within the home that we will be introducing that to the board here in the next month or so.
So thank you. So the 90 square meter secondary house still there. So if you have 1,000 square foot house, you want to build a bigger house, you're sort of out of luck because your smaller house is too big to be a small house, but it's still small. So that doesn't change, right? Okay, thank you.
Great. Are there any further comments? So does what is it? The density bonus warrant any actual investigation on our part? Clarification on whether or not any of our communities within the region can even benefit from the density bonus? Go ahead, Alex.
We can certainly look into that, absolutely, and report back to the board. We are, as I mentioned, we are going to prepare a report on housing again for the board in addition to the last update that was given in February. So that could be something that we investigate as staff and provide some more information as it becomes available.
Okay, if it comes to the point where it's just like it's sometime in the midterm to far future, only Port Alberni could benefit from it, maybe we just kind of drop the ball at that point and let them handle it. Dr. Boyko, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It will apply to the ACRD in a couple different ways based on what Alex just said. So it does permit one secondary suite or one accessory dwelling in all communities in BC, regardless of lot size. What will affect the ACRD even more, though, is if there is any transit stops, there will be no minimum parking required for projects within 400 meters of a transit stop. Home builders can determine the parking needs of that project at that time. So you can say that I'm going to build an apartment building with no parking lots, and you'd have to actually put money aside to have some space for parking for bicycles or something like that somewhere else, or put some money aside for something. More importantly, it will phase out public hearings for housing projects consistent with OCPs, which we're already starting to implement right now, which have already undergone a public hearing. So this is where the OCPs become very important, as once something is in there and has had a public hearing, there will be no more public hearings for any housing projects. So once this is done, you can start building apartment buildings within 400 meters of transit stops with no parking spaces. Is basically the worst case scenario for anybody that actually has to drive anywhere. Thank you.
Oh yeah, my question was more specific to the density bonus rather than the application of these kind of things to big municipalities. So yeah, when it comes to places like Vancouver, Victoria, I actually think having no what is it, mandated minimum parking is probably a good idea for the really dense areas, but looking at it from our perspective, we're nowhere near that, I think. So I don't think that's a concern for anywhere near us. But the density bonus might be something we could qualify for. But I don't know if it's only for larger areas or if it's something that we could benefit from. But you're quite right about the importance of OCP processes, which is why we're undertaking them now to make sure that we're complicit or complying with the law as it's written, but also understanding that we want every community to have the opportunity to engage in that early planning to help deal with what's going to happen demographically in the future. And that change is inevitable. So if a community wants to circle the wagons, then I think that's the time would be now to do it. Anyway, thanks. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none. Could we have a motion to receive the correspondence for information? Thank you, Director Roth, seconded by Director Siga. Seeing no further comment, all those in favor? A motion carried. Thank you. All right, that brings us to item 8, which is request for decisions and bylaws. So the first one is 8A, a Beaver Creek Community Club Community Works Fund Agreement. Terry, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. So the Beaver Creek Community Club had submitted a proposal in the fall to use some of the Community Works funds to do an upgrade to the Beaver Creek Community Hall, which is located in the electoral area of Beaufort. In order for them to proceed, we do need to draft a formal agreement. So this is similar to the agreements we've done with them in the past for their playground and other upgrades. And it was adopted as part of the financial plan. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Director Boyko, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Terry, for putting this together. I'm going to make a motion that the Alberta-Claycott Regional District Board of Directors approve a contribution agreement of $48,000 with the Beaver Creek Community Club to provide the organization Community Works funding for upgrades to the Beaver Creek Community Hall. This hall is being used almost every day right now for lots of public activities. There's a school running out of there every day during the week. And personally, I've been there quite a bit, and it is in need of some upgrades, and it is being used a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Dr. Roth. Any further comments? It is a great facility. I quite like it. Okay, all those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, that brings us to item B, which is the financial statements. Go ahead, Terry.
Thank you. So the KPMG auditors did talk about these financial statements here at the beginning, so I think I'll just leave it to questions as we've kind of gone through it.
Great. Any comments or questions? I think we covered it off in the presentations. Director Sparrow, go ahead.
Thank you for that. We were talking a little bit about single quotes and expenditures, and I know that with tradesmen and other things going through there, quite often you get single quotes on sort of a few things. It says here on page 82, single quotes below $200. So what's going to happen if we want to do a project with less than 2 quotes? We have to change this policy or modify this policy, or what has to be done to move forward before we get into situations where we actually can't do it?
So we are providing public opportunity. We're not, it's not that we're not giving the public a chance to bid on these things. We're going through all the steps using BC Bid. It's just that everyone in a lot of these areas, like consulting world, construction world, are busy. So we just aren't getting multiple quotes. So at that point, it is the board's choice, and staff usually recommend whether or not to proceed or not proceed with a project. So as long as we continue to follow that procedure and making it public, we are well within our right to award. We also have some items in our purchasing policy that we can direct award without going out to a public process, as long as it doesn't exceed free trade agreements, which usually kick in around $75,000, depending on what type of we're doing. However, yeah, our current practices are fine. Would we love to get more competition and more quotes in? Lots of times, yes, but we can't control that end of things. So,
yeah, you raise a big concern, Director Sparrow. It does seem like sometimes the pinch point isn't necessarily the number of companies, but rather their ability to expand to do all the jobs that are available to them. And that's more of a provincial issue of getting people trained to actually work for these companies. The only other thing I can think of is if there's the application where we can circumvent some of these scarcities and difficulties by looking into social and strategic procurement, creating special instances where we can make sure that work gets done based on having a different approach to procurement. But that's something that warrants, I think, more investigation. We're involved in some of those comments, but it also is not overly complicated, but it is sophisticated. Dr. Roth, please go ahead.
Yeah, when Lenora Lee was speaking about the audit, she said that it was substantially completed. So would this motion be too soon, or is it okay to go forward? I don't mind making the motion if it is, but she didn't say it was fully completed.
Right. So in order to complete it, she actually needs the board to approve the financial statements. So
Okay.
that's one component. And then Daniel and I have to sign the management representation letter. And once we get all that signed, they do one last check with our legal team just to make sure nothing has popped up since they did most of it, and then they issue the letter. So it's done as far as we can go without getting approval of the financial statements.
Okay, so I would like to make the motion that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors approve the 2023 audited financial statements for the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District as presented.
Thank you, Director Roth. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Director Siga. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And motion carried. Thank you. All right, that brings us to item C, Alberni Valley Aquatic Center feasibility study final report. Daniel, please go ahead.
So before the board, we have HCMA's final report attached to, of course, the staff report. So this final report concludes the aquatics outreach that started late 2022. And we just want to flag that it's the culmination of all the outreach, which included a number of open houses, 2 online surveys, which generated a little over 4,300 responses as a sum total. And included 2 phases of dialogue. The final report includes a review of existing systems, the needs benefit assessment, which is technical memo 1 and 2, technical memo 3, which is the prioritization of options, and then this final technical memo 4, which is the high level design and cost estimates. The design that was provided by HCMA includes everything that was identified as a top priority through the surveys, which is a 260 square meter leisure wave pool, a 25 meter 6-lane lap pool, a hot tub, slide, sauna, steam room, fitness space, 2 multi-purpose spaces, universal and gendered changing rooms, admin space, general service space, and storage space. The Class D estimates, and so we should just say that Class D is plus or minus 30%, so they really are a very high level estimate. I have this facility coming in at about 68 million. What they did not include is just the escalation, and the escalation is what we expect if everything were to be perfect and we say, yeah, this is what we want. By the time we actually issue a tender, we'd be probably looking at some point in 2026, and the escalation looks at how values will change over those next few years. They estimate that the value would add an additional 10 million to that price tag if we were to proceed 2 years from now. But nonetheless, I'll come back to that just to explain some of the details. They've also included the operational costs for a facility such as this, which would be in the range of 1.8 to 2.2 million. And per our framework for asset management, they included a rough estimate of $283,831 per year. Now, this information that we received concludes HCMA's work, but allows us to then advance to the next stage of work that needs to be done. And the board has already provided that direction to us. So we already have that roadmap, and that was all identified starting February of this year, and then confirmed through our budget process. And that overall summary of next steps is on page 122 of your agenda. So it was a rather long resolution of the board that had the various elements, but I'll summarize it quickly to say that our next step is really looking at the development of a service. Who are those proponents that are going to be part of the service if we have a joint service at all? And if we do have a joint service, then we have to discuss the governance of that service, the operations of that service, and then go into the details of location and the final facility that we'd be looking to advance with. So all of that, of course, will have to culminate in a referendum, and the direction of the board is that they would want a referendum per area, per service area, So I think it's fair to say that there would be a number of referendums going on across a number of areas later on in 2024. I would suspect in winter of this year is when we'd probably be looking at this. So no shortage of work for us to advance, and the work that HCMA did, supported by ACRD's and the City of Port Alberni's team, Big Splash, allows us to have all the information we need to have the next phase of discussions. If there are any questions, I can take them, but I just want to acknowledge that I feel that this was a very good project and an excellent level of collaboration between the city and the regional district to getting all of these steps done up until this point. So I tip my hat to the team and Heather Thompson, who led that team, and John, well done.
Great, thank you. Let's open it up for comments. I have Dr. Boyko and then Dr. Haggard.
Thank you very much for the team. That was a year of meetings put in to come to a conclusion. My big thing is let's get the referendum set up, make sure the question is as simple as possible. Do we want in or do we want out? Done. Keep the wording nice and simple. Make sure it's easy for people to participate, whether it be electronically, paper voting, or whatever that is. If one area does not come in, the vote was made to stop the project at that point. But I'd also like to entertain the fact that if an area does not want in, they will not be forced to participate, such as what happened with the grant and aid process back in February. So I just want people to think about that, and I'll make a motion about that here in a second. But if an area, this is a big project. If an area does not want to opt in, I don't want them to be forced to go into it. So however we want to put that into place. Secondly, even if the project goes forward right now, the cost will be 78 million, but there is 17 exemptions to the actual cost of the 78 million, which will be the land, extra foundations, demolish the old building, all the lots of little things like that are all up in the air right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Haggard and then Director Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say what a pleasure it was to work with the consultants and with the team. I think we got a lot done. It seemed like a long period of time, but it was a short period of time for the amount of work and feedback that we received. Secondly, I've been asked by City Council to request if HCMA could do an overview at a City Council meeting of the final report, and by Zoom is quite fine, and if it could just appear as a delegation, I think that would be fantastic that that's possible. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Roth next.
I'd like to second Fred's motion that if an area turns it down, that they're not forced into it.
Well, he hasn't moved it yet because he's got to read it out. Can we do the initial motions first and then we'll go right to Director Boyko afterwards?
I thought Fred was looking for a way to word it. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah. So let's do these first ones and then we'll go to Director Boyko's afterwards. So the first one is just to accept the report as presented. Could somebody, thank you, Director Siga, seconded by Director Sparrow. Any further comments? I think the report was written well enough, pretty straightforward. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried, thank you. And then the next one is letters of appreciation to everyone who took part. We have a motion for that. Thank you, Director Siga, seconded by Director Sparrow. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried, thank you. All right, Dr. Boyko, do you want to take a stab at what you're trying to get at?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I want to make this a recorded motion as well. Basically, the project, how about this? If an electoral area does not opt in with a referendum, they will not be forced in by the other members of the board to participate this at a future time. The reason is this is what happened with the grant and aid process back in February. And I want to make sure that the people, if they say something, then their word actually matters, however we want to word that. So, I mean, I guess I'm helped with Daniel, but
Yeah, like Daniel or Heather.
I can take a kick at it, but before taking a kick at it, I just want to identify a difference between the grant and aid process, which is already established, versus where we're at right now in the development of a service. And my understanding is that the resolution from February, I think it was 28th, point E in there has the development of a provincially approved referendum structure, not alternative approval process, that provides the ability for each area, City of Port Alberni, electoral area B, D, E, and F, to individually vote on their possible participation in the service. That structure in and of itself would in essence mean that if you are not in favor, you are not in the service, and we can't actually force you into a service. Once you're in a service, then you can get forced to certain things, because now you've created the structure where the voting structure says the majority rules. But I believe the way it's structured right now, we caught both ends, where on one end, the rural area is saying we don't want to be forced in, and I believe this catches it. And on the other end, we have the city saying we're not going on this next phase. We're not doing another 57 years alone on a pool. And so they said if we're not all in, then we're not in either. And so we pause the process. I'm just curious if that isn't solid enough, then I guess the language you're proposing is we can add, but I don't think it would change what we currently have. Like right now, you cannot be forced into a service.
Because this hasn't been created yet. Is that correct? Whereas with the grants and aid, everyone is in already, and therefore those kind of decisions can force that sort of thing.
Correct.
Which is why grants and aid.
yeah, I think the way you explain it is fairly well. So when we have the referendum, if a area does not opt in, then they are not in, period, move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, we can communicate that more clearly if you think that helps, though, Director Boyko. Because that's just the way that creating a service works or not. We'll go to Director Roth and then Director Minions.
I think that's very clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
I like what I hear. However, I know that in an area, and I'm pretty sure it has to do with the Qualicum pool and creating a service area where they were trying to bring another area in to pay for an upgrade. And I believe they were being forced in, but I don't know the end result. So they're going through that process. So it does make me worry a little bit too, but I like what Daniel said and I agree.
So Daniel actually is aware of how this had worked.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, that is an excellent example, but actually to the counterpoint, Nanus for a long time now has not been part of the aquatics function in the RDN. That includes Parksville and Qualicum Beach, and it has been a sore point because Coombs and Arrington are all part of it, and for Nanus, Director Rogers. Bob has long argued that his residents aren't using the pool enough, that you use the pool to warrant paying into it. They have not been forced in, and they cannot be forced in, which is why it's been going on for a solid decade. I've seen those arguments, and I guarantee you that Nanus has not been forced in. They might look at other things like two-tiered fees, all the things that we addressed in our survey, but they are certainly not forced into the service.
Yeah, this is actually one of the good regional districts, is that when you create a service and somebody is out, you can't force them to get in. And that's unless you want to redo the whole thing, which can happen too. But I think I've made Director Minions wait too long. So please go ahead.
Thank you. I just was going to kind of comment more on Daniel's point that I think with the motion that we put forward and how I amended it, it was really intended to not lock anybody in, including the City of Port Alberni. So I do think that we're covered already. And I also just want to highlight that there is no intent here to force anyone into a service, especially a $68 million capital cost service. There is very much just an intent to not move forward partially. So if, as I've said many times before, if that means not moving forward at all, then I'm not opposed to that. From my perspective and my preference is that we're all in together or all out. And if all out is the choice, then I'm fine with that as well. And then I just wanted to note as well that I think sometimes when these motions are put forward last minute, they can have unintended consequences down the road. So I think that, you know, something like this motion, if Director Boyko wanted to put something forward to further kind of protect what he feels like needs to be protected in his area, that we should consider like taking it as a notice of motion, having staff properly work with the director to craft something, and then being able to get proper advice on what consequences that actually has, both positive and negative, before as a board we vote on it. I just think it's better practice if we're informed, if we can see something in writing when it is something that could bind us in a multi-year project. Thank you.
Okay, so we could do that, Dr. Boyko, have some staff help you kind of figure out through the process where the pinch point may be for you and your community and other directors' communities and even Port Alberni. And then that might be the result of a good process of working it through. That being said, this reminds me of hoping that we can have a conversation to really tackle grants and aid before we get to that point again next year, because we should be thinking about that, and it's never anyone's first priority, but it's always a sore point when we go through it. Thanks. Go ahead, Dr. Boyko.
Thank you. And I agree with what Daniel said, that we can just leave it as is. If you're in the service, you're in. If you're out, you're out. Leave it like that. And I think that's very straightforward and carry on. But yes, grant and aids, we should be talking about that again before we get there. Thank you.
We have started. Oh, okay. Heather has reminded me that we are actually, staff are working on different approaches to grants and aid because we already did a motion immediately after grants and aid. So yes, thank you for the reminder, Heather. With that in mind, are there any other comments or questions on this? Okay, seeing none, thank you everyone for the work that's being done on this. I think it really comes down to making sure that this covers off the interests of all the communities involved, but also plays clear that if the decision is no on all ends, that we can still answer the people who want a pool going, it's too much money. We can't do it right now. No one else wants to do it. And I think that's why we're going through this process. Not that it might not go ahead, but that we have to go through a process that's more detailed than yes or no right at the beginning. We need to know what we could be building and what it would look like. It's got to be more solid, right? It's like when we do things as a board, we have to actually have a motion to do a thing rather than to vaguely think about it, which I think is a different way of thinking, but really helpful anyway. So I'd like to thank everyone involved, and we'll move on to the next item. Oh, it's planning matters. Please, municipality directors, do not leave the building. But we're getting into 9.1 now. 9.1A is a temporary use permit. Alex, please take us through it.
Thank you very much. This, the first file is a temporary use permit application for a short-term rental on the property located at 2315 Tofino Euclid Highway in the Millstream area of Long Beach. The applicants reside full-time on the property, and they intend to rent a secondary cabin as a short-term rental for a 3-year period. The board had first considered this application on March 27th, after which the neighbor notification was completed and the public notice was advertised. No correspondence was received on this application, and the applicants have now completed the health and life safety inspection with the building inspector with no issues identified that need to be addressed. So at this time, staff recommend that the board issue the temporary use permit. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Since it's Long Beach, Dr. Siga, do you want to take this?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to move that the Alberni Clackwood Regional District Board of Directors issue a temporary use permit, TUP 23007.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Thank you, Director Roth. Any further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. Item B, Sprout Lake Development Variance Application. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This one is a development variance to reduce the side yard setback for a detached garage from 15 feet to 7.5 feet. The 700 square foot garage would be located on a level area at the top of the property on Dixon Drive and outside of the 30-meter riparian area. The Sprout Lake Advisory Planning Commission considered this application at their April 15th meeting where they supported it as presented, and staff recommend that the board proceed with the neighbor notification process for the application. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Renee or Director Lecourcier, please go ahead.
Yes, I'll make the motion that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors consider issuing a development permit variance permit DVD 23012, subject to the neighboring properties being notified as per Local Government Act S 499.
Thank you. And pardon me, seconded by Director Siga. It's Director Lecourcier. You have an E at the end. Need to remember that. Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Item C, Sprout Lake.
This application is a temporary use permit application for a short-term rental on the property located at 8558 Sterling Arm Drive in Sprout Lake. The applicants intend to utilize a cabin on the property as a short-term rental. There are a total of 6 dwellings on this property. The property owners reside in one of them, and the remainder are rented to long-term tenants. The property owners are working through a building permit application currently for renovations to this cabin, and a new septic system has been installed to serve the entire property. As part of the application review, the development would also be referred to the Sprout Lake Fire Department to ensure that adequate fire protection can be met. The Sprout Lake APC supported this application at their April meeting, and at this time, staff recommend that the board proceed with that neighbor notification process and public advertising to gather input on the permit before making a final decision. Thank you.
Director Lecourcier.
I'd like to make the motion that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors consider temporary use permit TUP 23006 subject to the following: issuance of an occupancy permit for building permits SL 21-40, confirmation from the Sprout Lake Fire Department that adequate fire protection can be provided to the development, and the neighborhood notification as per Local Government Act S 492 be carried out.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Director Boyko, do you second? And then comment? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering how we get 6 rental units in a place that is zoned, what are we at? We're residential zoning here. I just wonder how we got to that point in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, happy to answer that. So the current zoning on this property is RA1, which allows for the 1 single family dwelling, 1 accessory dwelling unit, and accessory buildings beyond that. So the existing dwellings that we have on the property all appear to have been constructed prior to the adoption of the zoning bylaw in 1973, and may be considered legal non-conforming in accordance with the Local Government Act. I will highlight that the neighboring parcels, are zoned RA1 as well, which do permit the 1 single family dwelling and 1 accessory dwelling unit. But this one is a little bit unique as much of the development predated the zoning bylaw. Now, any new construction on the property must comply with the current zoning, and the building permit that was issued for renovations to the existing cabin in 2022 allows for the maintenance of that existing structure. Hopefully that helps.
That does help. So basically, if you got a cabin that's older than 1973 and then you renovate it, and then it can magically become a second unit. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. That brings us to any further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? And motion carried. All right, that brings us to item D, Beaver Creek. Is it this one or the next one, Dr. Haggard? I didn't write down. So the last one? Okay, thank you. Okay.
This Beaver Creek application is a development variance for a 1 acre property on Mercy Road in the Beaver Creek area. The property owners have applied to reduce the watercourse setback from 30 meters to 15 meters from a minor watercourse that dissects the southern boundary of this property. And that intention is to allow for more flexibility in the permitted building envelope of the vacant property. The application aligns with the development permit riparian area guidelines that we have in the Beaver Creek OCP. The neighbor notification for this application was completed on April 9th, and no public correspondence has been received. At this point, staff recommend that the board issue the development variance, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Dr. Roth?
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors issue development variance permit DVE 24001.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Director Sparrow. Any further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? A motion carried. Thank you. Brings us to item E, a temporary use permit for Beaver Creek.
Yes, thank you. This is another temporary use permit application for a short-term rental. This application is a renewal of an existing temporary use permit. The property is at 5458 Highland Drive in the Beaver Creek area. The applicants reside within the house and they intend to continue operating a short-term rental within the accessory dwelling unit located in the basement or the lower level of the home. The TUP renewal would allow for that STR use to continue for an additional 3-year period. The neighbor notification and public advertising for this application again was completed and no correspondence was received. Staff recommend that the board issue the TUP renewal. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Roth?
Yes, I'd like to move that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors issue temporary use permit TUP 20004R.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Dr. Siga. Any further comments? Did you change venue, Dr. Law? Looks like it anyway. You're on your computer.
You're perceptive. I had another meeting, so I had to leave the room to,
Oh yeah,
but
2:30.
now I'm back. So
Thank
you
you.
didn't even notice I was gone. You just thought I switched. You just changed.
Excellent.
Yeah, you don't have a vote in these things, and there's a whole new section for that when it does. Okay, any further comments? It's seeing none. All those in favor? A motion carried. All right, item F, Cherry Creek. We just have to wait for Director Haggard to leave. Whew, it's a long one, guys. Director Sparrow. Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. This is a public hearing report for a rezoning application on a property located at 2787 Alberni Highway, again in the Cherry Creek area. The public hearing was held on April 16th with 3 members of the public in attendance. The development would rezone the property from winery and cidery use to a new highway commercial C4A district to allow for a range of commercial uses. The bylaws include an OCP amendment to redesignate the property from residential use to commercial use. The public hearing minutes include 5 letters from the public that were received at the hearing, with 2 letters expressing general support for the application and 3 letters expressing general opposition to the rezoning. The letters raised concerns about the impact on traffic and road safety and the impact on neighboring residential uses. And the comments included concerns about screening and landscaping adjacent to those neighboring uses. I will highlight that following engagement with the Cherry Creek APC at the outset of this application, the board proceeded with the C4A zone that prohibits the development of gas stations on this site, would require increased 10-meter building setbacks from the neighboring residential uses, and would also require a larger 0.4 hectare minimum lot size to limit the subdivision potential. At the public hearing, the applicants also expressed a willingness to work with the Ministry of Transportation on closing the existing access from Maybell Road and maintaining one access from Old Nanaimo Highway. And again, if this application proceeds, the ministry will need to approve the zoning bylaws before the board considers them for adoption. So at this time, staff recommend that the board receive the public hearing report and the minutes and then proceed with 2nd and 3rd readings of those bylaws, and we're happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Dr. Sparrow, go ahead.
Well, thank you for that. This was probably the quietest public hearing I've been to ever, which is a good sign. It's going in that direction. So I'd like to make the motion that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors receive the public hearing report.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Director Siga. Any further comments? Dr. Boyko, please go ahead.
Thank you. I got bored and I watched that public hearing just because I like to do things. The neighbor was quite concerned about the mess and noise along the road there. So I know that the owners had a plan to put a nice vegetated buffer there. Is there a way that we can put something on the title to ensure that road access from Maybell Road actually has to take place before this rezoning goes in? I forget what you call when you put some title. It's what is it called, Alex?
Yeah, so there are options to place a restrictive covenant on the title, for
That's the
example.
word.
I'd be happy to address this if that's okay through the chair. I think there's a few options here. So the Ministry of Transportation does have to sign off on this before it's approved, and that could be something that we highlight with the ministry. They also have to issue a commercial access permit for any new commercial access or new development on the property. And then the additional tool that we have is the development permit area requirements, where this property is included within a development permit area for the objective for form and character of commercial development. So if this rezoning were to be successful and the property were to sell to a proponent who had a commercial use that they wanted to develop, an application would need to come back to the ACRD to ensure that we consider things like access and egress complying with the zoning and our OCP guidelines, and then as well as the landscaping and the screening from neighboring uses and from the highway, and then the parking and signage and the overall aesthetics of the development as well. So there's a few options there. I'll leave it up to the board to decide what they want to do.
Thank you for the explanation, Alex. And yeah, I think once you get word back from MOTI and everything else, we can look at potentially doing restricted covenant just to make sure that access is shut off, because that was one of the largest concerns. Thank you.
So just to clarify, Alex, I'm not sure I followed completely. So we would be able to go through all these processes and do that after the fact, or should we do that like before we get the third reading, or does that matter?
So the board can make that a condition of rezoning. I do hesitate to make changes like that after a public hearing. It might make more sense to deal with that with the Ministry of Transportation prior to adoption of the bylaw, and barring that, we could make sure that it's a part of the development permit requirements. I just wouldn't want to risk the public hearing process at this point.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and we're not adopting yet, so there is time by what you said. Thank you very much. Director LaCourciere?
And having to request the right from the Minister of Transport to approve this development, wouldn't that kind of solve this whole problem? Because they would make sure that the road access and everything are correct before they approve it. So just getting that step might solve the whole problem here.
I think that's what Alex was trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Director LaCourciere. The last horse has crossed the finish line now. I'm okay. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? This is just to adopt the minutes or the report. Yeah. I'll declare the motion carried. That brings us to the next item. Go ahead, Director Sparrow. Sorry, that was the public hearing report. The minutes are next.
Yes. So the Alberni Lake Regional District Board of Directors received the public hearing minutes.
Thank you, Director Seeger, for seconding. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? The motion carried.
That the bylaw P1475 Cherry Creek Official Community Plan Amendment bylaw be read a second time.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Director Seeger. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? The motion carried. Thank you.
That bylaw P1475 Cherry Creek Official Community Plan Amendment bylaw be read a third time.
Seconded. Thank you, Director Seeger. Put your hands behind the jug so I can't see it all the time. Yeah, the water jug. Okay. Okay. Any further comments? Seeing none. Thank you. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you.
That bylaw P1476 Regional District Alberni Lakewood Zoning Text Amendment bylaw be read a second time.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Director Roth. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried.
That bylaw P1476 Regional District Alberni Lakewood Zoning Text Amendment bylaw be read a third time.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Roth. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carried.
That bylaw P1483, Regional District of Alberni Claycourt Zoning Atlas Amendment bylaw be read a second time.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Roth. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried.
That bylaw P1483, Regional District of Alberni Claycourt Zoning Atlas Amendment bylaw be read a third time.
Thank you, and seconded by Director Roth. Thank you for that. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried. All right, thank you for that. And thank you, Alex. Okay, that brings us into reports. Anyone want to pull anything out of staff reports? Usually it's just the meeting schedule. I think there was a thought on moving a meeting, but I don't think it's for May, is it? Yeah.
We had changed the location of the May 22nd board meeting. It's going to be in Ucluelet rather than here, and it will also be held on Zoom.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a good thing to note. Any further comments? Dr. Siga.
Yes, we sent it out this morning, so you should have received an email.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, can we have a motion to receive the reports? Thank you, Dr. Sparrow, seconded by Dr. Roth. Comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And motion carried. Thank you. All right, that brings us to 10.3. What happened to 10.2? I guess it doesn't matter. Next up is member reports. 911 Corporation, Director Beckett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report. There was no meeting.
Thank you. Next up is Vancouver Island Regional Library. Dr. Cote is not here. Okay, that brings us to Alberni Valley Chamber of Commerce. Item C, Dr. Minions, anything?
They are just reviewing their financials and audit tomorrow. No concerns have come up, and I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Air Quality Council, Dr. Sparrow. Quickly, please.
Thanks for that. I'll just do the highlights of the highlights then. The Air Quality Council, they did a March radio public service announcement. They're playing right now. Consultable backyard burning. Letters to support 7% emission limit reduction from Catalyst Papers. They're looking at that. Issued 2 Catalyst Papers in Ministry of Environment and issued by the City of Port Alberni to the Ministry of Environment. So 2 letters going, trying to reduce the amount of emissions from Catalyst Paper. They're currently drafting a letter to the Ministry of Forestry urging reduction of harmful forestry practices such as slash pile burning to reduce the amount of particulates in the air. They're continuing efforts and discussions with West Coast Weather Services to realize a ventilation index for the Alberni Valley, because there's none right now. You get it from the West Coast or the East Coast, but none for the Valley. And they initiated communications with BC along with possible collaboration on participation in Carter's project to make air quality monitors more accessible to this valley. I will shorten the list up to there, and I will forward the rest to Heather.
All right, thank you for that. The ventilation index is something that the Banfield community discusses on their core board all the time. So, yeah, well taken there. AVICC Director Cote is not here. Sawakin Public Advisory Group, Director Sparrow.
Thank you for that. Some interesting things here. They're doing a presentation, they had a presentation on tethered harvesting. It's developed in New Zealand to overcome challenging harvesting on steep slopes using a winching machine attached to mechanized harvesting equipment. This method of harvest has advantages to worker safety, environmental performance, and wood volume recovery. This method is typically used on slopes between 35 and 65 degrees. Tethered falling has been used so far in TFL 44. I'm not quite sure where exactly. The other one here is there is a new government requirement that came into effect on April 1st, 2024. In short, all new roads and cutbacks proposed by the forest licensee must be made available for review and comment by the general public. The public will be notified of future forest operations map in the local paper and directed to the company website to see overview and cut block specific maps and roads. Comments can be uploaded to the company website for 30 days. Alternately, individuals can make an appointment with the forest company to review material at their office. Licensees are not obligated to incorporate all public comments received, but all must be taken into consideration. Following the comment period, licensees must create a report for the government with proof of advertising to a local paper and description of comments received. And Tawaskon Forest Party Inc. will be submitting a forest operations map, FOM number 1 today with a review period that ends on May 24th, 2024. And the links are on their website. So they're doing the first one starting today. There you go. That's my report.
Thank you for that. I have comments, but I'll leave them since my nation is a part owner, so I can. That brings us to other reports. Does anyone have any other reports? The only one I can think of is the APD closure, but that's not really a report. Just something that happened. Go ahead, Director Sparrow.
That's right. The APD was on the last report. I wasn't here. The APD has a permanent curtailment, correct? Not a permanent closure, which is different.
Indefinite's not
Indefinite.
permanent.
And then it's more to do with the severance packages than anything else. But yes, it's the same thing as SOMAS did when they started to go down for their 4-year time frame, and then they have the guard still there, but nobody working. That's where they're at right now. Yes.
Maybe there can be a connection between comments on the previous items that you talked about and the effect it can have on those decisions can have on operations at a value added level, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you for that. Any other reports? Kind of want to hear about the sign, Dr. Minions, but I guess that's neither here nor there. I just don't know where it's going to go. Oh, the Walmart area? Oh yeah, that's where it starts. Duh. Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive the reports. Thank you, Dr. Haggard, seconded by Dr. Siga. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carried. All right, I don't think we have any unfinished business. There is no late business. The one person who was in the gallery left the moment his zoning decision went through. Do we have any questions in the email address?
No questions in email and no questions in Zoom. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, now would be the time for me to read out the motion to close the meeting to go in camera. I'll move this. Dr. Sparrow, go ahead.
One little comment regarding the, we had a change of agenda, right? When we put in 4.1, did we adopt the minutes or receive the minutes? Do you remember back far enough that way?
It was the way that it was stated is I'll just move the motion as written. So whatever it says.
Okay, yeah, because we should change it to being adopted rather than received, correct?
Oh, no, it says adopted.
It's adopted.
Yeah,
adopted.
the amended agenda I emailed out earlier this week, changed it to adopted. Yeah.
Okay, and that's what I have here, yeah. Thank you for checking though. Okay, now we're going to close the meeting to go in camera for several reasons. Because it's going in camera, I'll move the motion and we can have a seconder afterwards. This is a motion to close the meeting to the public as per the community charter under sections 91A, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the regional district or another position appointed by the regional district. 2, 91C, labor relations or other employee relations. 91F, law enforcement. If the board considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the conduct of an investigation under or enforcement of an enactment. And 4, 92B, the consideration of information received and held in confidence relating to negotiations between the regional district and provincial government or the federal government or both, or between the provincial government or the federal government or both and a third party. I will move that. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Dr. Roth. Any further comments? So 4 items. Okay, all those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, we will just wait.